Okay, open your Bibles up to James chapter 2. Appreciate Matt Purdom filling in while Derek and I were out of town last week. And I know he got you all through chapter 2, but he told me that he felt like he kind of rushed the end of chapter 2. So we're going to spend a few minutes this evening revisiting verses 14 through 26. So I'm going to start by reading those, and then we'll take a few minutes to kind of dissect the verses. James 2 verse 14 says, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, be warmed and filled,' without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead." I think all of us would agree that faith is essential to Christianity. Hebrews 11:6 says, "And without faith, it's impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him." So we know that in order to please God, we must have faith. Faith is the cornerstone for salvation. Ephesians 2:8 says, "For grace you have been saved through faith, and this not your own doing, it is the gift of God." In 2 Corinthians 5, verses 6 through 7, Christians are called to walk by faith. So we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord, for we walk by faith, not by sight. And then finally, we know that apart from faith, there is only sin. Romans 14:23 says, "But whoever doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith, for whatever does not proceed from faith is sin." So as you look through those first few verses that I read, verses 14 through, maybe 16, 17, we see three different types of faith. Okay? Three different types of faith that I want to examine this evening. The first is a dead faith. What are the characteristics of a dead faith? You're not living it, okay? Okay, so words, not living. No works, okay? It's not real faith, right? Words are substituted for deeds. If someone has dead faith, they know, but they don't act. Maybe they show up, they're on time. They listen, but they don't apply. In other words, you could almost define it as dead faith is an intellectual faith. I hear the word, I see the word, I move on and continue with my life. Someone who has intellectual faith, dead faith, is somebody who never truly submits to God nor the teachings of the Bible. We know because James writes here that this is faith that cannot save. Yes, ma'am. So you got me to my next point, Miss Sherry, which is a second kind of faith, demonic faith. Okay? Demonic faith, what are the characteristics we see there? Now, I know we don't have the definition demonic faith, but as Sherry pointed out, demons believe. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. A conviction of existence, okay. There's another hand over here, I thought. Yes, sir. Okay. So, a couple good things we brought out there. One, we know that demons believe. They believe in God. They believe in a God. It says that they believe in the one God. Mark 3, verses 11 through 12, we see demons there recognizing that Jesus is the Son of God. He is deity. In Luke 8, verse 31, we see that they believe in a place of eternal condemnation. Jesus looks at the legion and they say, please don't send us into the abyss, which is the eternal resting place for Satan. Matthew 8, verses 28 through 29, they believe that Jesus will be the one to judge because they say, don't come till a later date. So in other words, demons have an intellectual faith. They believe there's a God. And what does it say there in James? Specifically in the end of verse 19. And tremble. ESV says they shudder. So they have an intellectual faith, but there's also a sense of an emotional reaction, as much emotions as demons can have. If somebody has demonic faith, they may believe, they may be emotionally moved, they may fear God in a sense, but if they stop there, that is faith that cannot save. And then we come to the third faith, dynamic faith. What would you say are characteristics of someone who has dynamic faith? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. They live godly. I must need hearing aids. I'm sorry. You're like the fourth person I've asked to speak up. So it's me, not you. Yes, sir. Okay, so it's evident by the way in which they conduct themselves or the actions that they take. What you know, what you hear, what you believe impacts what you do. Okay? So we have an intellectual aspect to dynamic faith. We have an emotional aspect to dynamic faith. But we also have will. We have heart. We have what James is asking his readers to do over and over and over and over and over again, which is to do. A dynamic faith can't be a true faith if it doesn't have action. And that action comes by what's up here and what's in here. True saving faith, dynamic faith, leads to obedience, which produces action. James demonstrates this by bringing out two particular individuals, which, again, this being a Jewish Christian audience, would be very familiar with, right? He brings up Abraham and he brings up Rahab. Tell me some things that we know about these individuals. Just characteristics of or terms we've used in the past. What do we know about Abraham and Rahab? Okay, all right, he followed God's direction. faith Abraham was justified. Yeah, we read that there in James. What else? He was called a friend of God. Okay. All right, what about Rahab? She was specifically pointed out because of, frankly, the great risk for which she took at her own expense. So we've thrown a couple up there. We know that Abraham he's the father of Jews, right? Unto him were born all nations. And if you think about this from a contrasting standpoint, it's very interesting. We have the father of Jews, and then we have Rahab, who was a Gentile. We also know that Abraham was a godly man. He feared God, and he was just a kind of common everyday countryman. But then we have Rahab, who the Bible specifically states, and she's pointed out for being a harlot, for being a prostitute. Two very different backgrounds. We mentioned that Abraham was a friend of God. Rahab belonged within a city that God wanted to destroy, that God wanted to eliminate. But what did they both have? They didn't just have faith. They had working faith. They had dynamic faith. They had active faith. It's pretty simple. Regardless of their differences and their choices in life or what life brought them, there came a point in time when they each had faith, obtained faith, an intellectual faith. Abraham, early in his life, if you consider 75 early in biblical times, and Rahab later in life. But they each met a fork or forks in a road where they could have simply had dead or demonic faith. They simply could have said, I hear what you're saying, God, or I see what needs to be done, and yeah, I get it, but I don't, no thanks. Through their actions, right? They had dynamic faith. They had working faith. They had an active faith. And it says that it justified them in the eyes of God. I mentioned before, this is yet another example of James reinforcing what he wants from the readers then, what he wants from the readers now. There is a necessity and an urgency to do. I asked Eric Swisher before I started tonight if I had this quote right, and I almost did. But this is the way I remembered it in my mind. When Eric performed his father's funeral, Larry Keith Swisher, one of the things that he said stuck out to me was that Larry Keith had a saying, and that saying was, I look for reasons. That's right. In my mind, it said, don't find reasons not to do, find reasons to do. And that goes back to the will and the heart. If our faith is to be active, if our faith is to be dynamic, if it is to be a working faith, it is a faith that requires doing. And what have we said that James is really a collection of? It's a collection of teachings so that those reading it would grow spiritually. They become more mature. Spiritually mature Christians find reasons to do. They don't find reasons not to. Yes, sir. And how many times throughout the Bible do we find those who were pillars of the Christian community, those who we talk about in our children's Bible classes, and what always came at some point or another in their story, if they were considered righteous? There was an action. They were active. They were doing. Yes, sir. So I'm not a Star Wars guy. Do or do not what? Okay. That's the little green guy that said that, right? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yoda. Do or do not. There is no try. Yes, ma'am. And listen, I am as guilty as anybody that I've found reasons not to. We've all found reasons not to do. Sometimes it seems easier not to do than to do. But that's when we have to go back to the facts. That's not dynamic faith. That's not active faith. Reasons to do are a lot. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. They're both trees. Yeah, I think James, his simple example of, you find a brother or sister who is poorly clothed or hungry, and you just say to them, "Be well, go in peace." That's a tree that's not budding. That's more lip service than anything. All right, we're going to move on to chapter 3. I want to read through verse 12. James 3, verse 1. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. So, as we've seen before with James, he kind of shifts quickly to something else that is somewhat related, somewhat unrelated. Possibly when thinking about encouraging those to have a dynamic, active, working faith, he now thinks about teachers, right? It could be a logical step. Regardless, he starts it off with a warning at this part of the letter. This section, this first part really focuses on the power of the tongue. Later on, we'll get into the destruction that the tongue can cause. But specifically, he talks now in these first several verses about the power and the influence, and he starts with a warning by saying, let not many of you become teachers. James does not seek to limit the amount of teachers for generic reasons, right? It's not because there's overcrowding of teachers and he's just trying to bat them away, right? It's not because he's trying to hoard all the glory. If you read in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 29 through 30, we read there that not everybody is meant to be an apostle. Not everybody is meant to be a healer. Not everybody is meant to be a teacher. Not everybody is meant to be a prophet. Not everybody is meant to be. We all have different individual gifts. Knowing that man is inherently fallible means that greater consideration should be given by those who desire to teach, just like those who desire to become elders or deacons. It's the power and wild nature of the tongue in regards to teaching that concerns James. At that time, most people wouldn't have read this letter. The letter would have been read aloud to them, and they would have heard it, because most of the people were illiterate. So there was a lot of notoriety to be had, a lot of kind of pomp and circumstance. If you were one of the individuals maybe in the town that you were in that could actually read, could understand. And it could be that maybe this is more a sign of the times that James was in, that he didn't want anybody to be after a role of teaching for the wrong reason. He wanted them to be after it for the reasons that Jesus wanted them to teach. But I think it still holds true today that we're all fallible. And just like we spend a lot of time when deciding and thinking and praying on who elders or deacons should be within this church, I think the argument can be made the same for teachers. But why? Why should greater consideration be given for those who desire to teach? Well, it says it simply, because those who teach will be judged with greater strictness. Now, this is not to say that a faulty teacher receives a greater penalty, right? The gate is just as wide for the sinner as it is for the false teacher whenever Judgment Day comes around. They both receive eternal death. But the importance of teaching opens the teacher and their teacher up to much greater scrutiny. Pretty simple. More words equals more opportunity to mess up. More opportunity to spread the wrong words, spread false truth. And should a teacher stray from the truth in their teachings and consequently cause those who they're teaching to stray, they become false teachers, causing others to sin. So the warnings to those who would become teachers is rooted in the tongue. I got to tell you, I have never really thought much about the human tongue until I did this preparation for this class tonight. But it's a pretty interesting organ of the human body, right? The average tongue is 3 inches in length. I read somewhere that the longest one ever measured was like 3.9 inches. I don't know who that was and if that's verified. But average is 3. The average 3-inch tongue has 8 muscles inside of it. 4 intrinsic and 4 extrinsic. The tongue has anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 taste buds. It is the most flexible, strongest muscle in the human body. Like fingerprints, our tongues have their own unique print to them. Our tongue aids our human bodies in taste. It aids us in swallowing. It aids us in speech. But the tongue doesn't have a mind of its own. The tongue doesn't act on its own, just like our extremities do not. Our tongues are conduits between our thoughts, and those who would listen or hear. Our tongues are representative of what lies within our hearts. It's small, and it's rarely visible, but its use and its action have profound, life-changing impacts, not only on ourselves, but on others. Stop for a second because I went on a tangent. Anybody have anything they'd like to add after I went on my own diatribe like James likes to do sometimes? Yes, sir. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. If you are given a role in which you are responsible for educating others, you should be pretty sure about the material which you're using to educate. It better be accurate. Okay. Let's move on to some of the other things that he talks about in these first 12 verses. James uses two metaphors to demonstrate the power of the tongue. So first, he talks about the bit in a horse's mouth, and then he talks about a very small rudder on a large ship. Okay? So very common things that would have been very familiar to people back then, also very familiar to people like us, right? The bit, something you put in the mouth of the horse, connected to the reins. John, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. You pull on the reins, and then that guides the horse, right? The rudder, you move the rudder based upon a steering wheel or based upon your hands at the back of the boat, and that directs the boat where it's going to go, its own path. Both of those items, the bit and the rudder, are small. They're, frankly, ineffective whenever they're on their own. What use is a bit or a rudder when separated from the larger object that it's meant to actually affect? In today's terms, we could even use what use is a mouse, a computer mouse, or a trackpad apart from the desktop or laptop? It really has no purpose. It does nothing on its own, but it can control something much larger, much more impressive. But when that ineffective object, the bit, the rudder, the computer mouse, the trackpad, is put to use under the right circumstances, it can exact tremendous power. But to put to work the bit in the horse's mouth, the rudder for the large ship, or in our example that we created, the computer mouse for the computer, two things are required. First is obedience. The horse must obey the bit. If you don't, the bit doesn't work. The ship's path must adhere to any change that the rudder gives it. And the computer must be programmed in such a way to accept the movement of the mouse. Okay, you with me so far? Second, we see that guidance is required. The horse must obey the bit to be guided down a rocky or a narrow path. The ship's rudder must obey a change in direction to be guided through shallow or rough waters. The computer must obey the mouse to be guided to accomplish a specific task. But what are we missing? We've got a bit, we've got a rudder, we've got a mouse. We've got the fact that they'll obey, they can be guided, but at the end of the day, there is someone responsible. The rider pulls back on the reins, so the bit causes the horse to obey and be guided in a certain way. The pilot turns the helm of the ship, causing the rudder to move and change the ship's course. The child or the adult moves the mouse, causing the computer to react and be guided down any number of paths. We've said it before. It is the will, it is the heart of the individual that leads the tongue. The tongue is a great fire. We're going to talk about that in a second. A small fire that can cause a great blaze. But at the end of the day, someone is in control. It's our will and it's our heart. Verse 5 reads, so also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. The bit, the rudder, the computer mouse, the tongue. They all have reason to boast, if you think about it. Remember we said these are all small, insignificant things. You hardly ever see the bit in the horse's mouth. You rarely ever see the rudder unless you're under the water or the ship's out of the water. The tongue is rarely visible. The mouse is insignificant. But while small and insignificant on their own, their power and influence over much larger things have crucial, long-lasting impacts. Thought I saw a hand back here. Yes, sir. Yeah. Chaos and sin. No, I think that's a great point. I think that builds even more on the analogy here, which is we've said that there's someone responsible, but is that someone responsible a responsible individual? Is that rider trained? Is that pilot trained? No, I think that's great. So as we move on, yes, Ms. Sherry, sorry, I'll get you here. You do, yeah. It's a responsibility. Okay. We read on that it talks about the tongue as a fire, albeit it is a small one. It is a fire that, even though small, it's never extinguished. It's always, in my terminology, smoldering. But yet mass destruction awaits a small fire. We have a fire pit at our home, on our back patio, and I wish we used it more, but we use it a fair amount. And it's a contained fire, so I really have no problem starting the fire and walking away from it to do whatever I need to do, leave it unattended, especially after the fire has died down and our family decides to turn in for the night. The flames are all but gone. There's a faint amount of smoke. It's mostly ash at this point. The embers are hard to find. But what's the danger there? All it takes is the embers that are underneath. I've been with my father-in-law on different camps. We've built different fires, and it seems nearly every time, even if you pour water on the fire, unless you just completely douse it, the next morning you could wake up and you could probably find a few coals that are still hot, something that could start a new fire with. We cannot extinguish our tongue, right? The only option there is to cut it off, and I don't recommend it. But we have a small fire that is at all times within our bodies that at a moment's notice can cause mass destruction. And James points this out because he wants his readers to be aware of that. Now, we focus a lot on the negative sides of the tongue here in these verses. And I want to get to some positives here in a second. But can we think of some times, whether in the Bible or within our culture, where this small fire caused mass destruction? Anything that comes to mind? It certainly can cause separation. So think about David and Bathsheba, right? What happened in that situation? David was up on his roof. He was walking around. He looked and he saw. And he saw that Bathsheba was beautiful. But then what did he do next? He lingered, but then he sent and inquired. Yes, but before all that, he sent and he inquired. He saw something that he liked, and he could have told himself, I'm not going to do it. Maybe I've lusted. Maybe I've sinned. I'll turn away. But you know what? Let me find out about this woman that I just saw. Another one is within, back in the 90s, late 90s, a certain president that we all know who said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And what happened there? Did that, not only the act, but certainly his trying to cover up and lie about the act, did that not stain his whole body for the rest of his life? The tongue is a wild, powerful part of our bodies that has innumerable impacts. I made mention that there's a lot of focus in this section on the destruction of the tongue, but James clearly wants to emphasize that, but we can certainly pick up on the power of the tongue for good. We know as we read later on that it can bless and praise our Lord. We know that it was the tongue, the ministry of Jesus and the apostles that brought about the spread of the gospel message. We see that a spring does produce fresh water. A fig tree does produce figs. A grapevine produces grapes. Think to some of the cultural examples that we have within our nation. I have a dream. A simple phrase that was used by a man that started a civil rights movement. Or Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, resulting in a wall that separated people for years being torn down. The power of the tongue or evil, we know. But let's not forget about the power of the tongue for good. All right, we've got a few minutes here. We're going to move into the final section, verses 13 through 18. Read with me, if you will. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his work in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist. There will be disorder in every vile practice, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So, very quickly, if I had you define what earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom are, what would you say? What would you say of earthly wisdom? Okay, knowledge applied that makes your life easier on earth. Any others? How about heavenly wisdom? I mean, he pretty much lays it out, does he not? if you line them up and you look at the characteristics of heavenly wisdom and earthly wisdom caused of jealousy, selfish ambition, boastfulness, bitterness. Heavenly wisdom is pure, like we talked about the fruits of the Spirit, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, merciful, impartial, and sincere. Earthly wisdom produces conflict. It produces disorder, whereas heavenly wisdom produces peace and righteousness. I move through this quickly, but how do we obtain heavenly wisdom so that we can use it for the proper use of the tongue that God would have us to use it for? It's prayer and supplication. If you will, turn to Psalm 25, and then we'll end our study here. Psalm 25, verse 1 says, "To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exult over me. Indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. They shall be ashamed who are wantonly treacherous. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." I think one of the reasons that wisdom immediately follows up this subject of the tongue is because in order to have proper uses of the tongue, what must we have? The knowledge and the wisdom to use it in such a way that God would have us to use it. Therefore, don't train your tongue with earthly wisdom. Train your tongue, your wills, your hearts with heavenly wisdom. And to obtain that, just as David did in Psalm 25, ask of God, and do not hesitate to ask him. Thank you all for your time, and we'll pick up on chapter 4 next week.